There's a car company making a bet that everyone else thinks is already over, while Tesla, Ford, Hyundai, and nearly every other automaker pours billions into batteries and charging networks. Honda is doing something different. Not louder, not flashier, just different. They're building cars that don't need charging stations. Cars that refuel in 3 minutes. Cars that run on the most abundant element in the universe and emit nothing but water. And the strangest part, they've been working on this for years, quietly, while the rest of the world declared the future already decided. This isn't about who's right or wrong. It's about what happens when a company refuses to follow the crowd, even when the crowd seems unstoppable. Because Honda has done this before. They've ignored the obvious path, stuck to their instincts, and built something the world didn't know it needed. And now they're doing it again, with hydrogen, at a time when most people think the conversation is over. But to understand why Honda is making this move now, you need to understand where it all started. Not with engineers and lab coats or boardroom presentations, but with one man whose hands were always covered in grease. Soichiro Honda wasn't the kind of person who sat in meetings or wore expensive suits. He was the kind of person who took things apart just to see how they worked. Born in 1906, the son of a blacksmith, his childhood was spent around hammers, metal, and heat, bicycles, engines, anything with moving parts. That was his world. And from the beginning, he believed machines weren't just supposed to function. They were supposed to have a soul. His first business wasn't glamorous. He made piston rings, small, unglamorous parts that most people never think about. In 1937, he started a company called Tokai Seki to supply them to Toyota. Then World War II happened. Bombs destroyed his factory. Everything was gone. But the story didn't end there. After the war, Japan was in ruins. Fuel was scarce. People needed transportation but couldn't afford cars. So in 1946, Soichiro Honda did something simple and brilliant. He found surplus military generator engines, the kind left behind after the war, and bolted them onto bicycles. They weren't pretty, but they moved, and people bought them. That's where Honda Motor Company began. Not with luxury or performance, but with practicality born out of necessity. By 1948, the company was official. And within years, Honda motorcycles were winning races, breaking records, and proving to the world that Japan could build machines that were fast, reliable, and well-engineered. Then came cars. But Honda didn't approach them the way other companies did. They didn't just build a body and drop an engine inside. For Honda, the engine was the heart. It wasn't a component. It was the identity. Their cars were smooth, responsive, reliable. Driving a Honda wasn't just transportation. It was an experience. And that philosophy carried the company forward for decades. Today, Honda is one of the largest engine manufacturers in the world. Motorcycles, cars, lawnmowers, jet engines, Formula One race cars. If it moves, there's a good chance Honda built the engine. The man who started with bicycle motors and greasy hands built a global empire. And that history matters now. Because Honda's decision to pursue hydrogen isn't random. It's rooted in the same instinct Soichiro had 70 years ago. Build what works. Don't follow trends. Trust the engine. And that brings us back to the present, where every other company is chasing the same thing. Electric vehicles, batteries, charging networks, government subsidies. It's the obvious move, the safe move, the move that makes sense on paper. But Honda looked at that path and asked a different question. What if batteries aren't the only answer? Now, before we go further, it's worth acknowledging what's happening with electric vehicles, because they're not a fad. They're real, they're growing, and in many ways, they've already won the conversation. A decade ago, EVs were a punchline. Slow, expensive, impractical. Today, they're everywhere. You see them in parking lots, on highways, charging outside grocery stores. Governments offer tax breaks. Some countries have announced plans to ban the sale of gas-powered cars entirely by 2035. The message is clear. The future is electric, and for a lot of people, that future feels right. No engine noise, no emissions while driving, just plug in overnight and wake up with a full battery. It's clean, it's simple, and the technology keeps improving. Batteries last longer. Charging times are dropping. Range anxiety, the fear that you'll run out of power before reaching a charger, is slowly fading as networks expand. EVs have momentum, real momentum, the kind that's hard to ignore. But there's another side to this, one that doesn't get talked about as much. They're expensive, and they're made from materials that aren't easy to get. Lithium, cobalt, rare earth metals. Mining them is destructive. It damages land, contaminates water, and often happens in countries with little environmental regulation. And once a battery reaches the end of its life, which happens after several years, disposal becomes a problem. Recycling programs exist, but they're not widespread. Most batteries end up sitting somewhere, waiting for a solution that hasn't been figured out yet. Then there's the grid. Charging an EV at home is convenient, but when millions of people do it at the same time, the electrical system struggles. In some places, utilities have asked residents not to charge during peak hours because the grid can't handle the load. And as more EVs hit the road, that problem will only grow. Building more power plants takes years. Upgrading infrastructure costs billions. The transition isn't as simple as swapping gas for electricity. And there's one more thing. Charging takes time. Even with a fast charger, you're looking at 30 minutes minimum, often longer. Compare that to filling a gas tank, which takes 5 minutes, and the difference is obvious. For daily commuting, it's manageable. But on long trips, it's a hassle. You have to plan your route around charging stations. You have to wait. And if the station is busy, you wait even longer. None of this means EVs are bad. They're not. They're a massive improvement over traditional combustion engines in many ways. But they're not perfect. And they're not the only option. That's what Honda realized. And that realization led them somewhere unexpected. Hydrogen. Not as a replacement for EV, but as a different path. One that solves some of the problems batteries create. One that doesn't require long charging times or rare materials. One that emits nothing but water. Honda had been thinking about this for years. And in 2015, they made their first real move. But this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable. Because what happened next wasn't a success. It was a lesson. And understanding that lesson is the only way to understand what Honda is doing now. Continued in next section, mid-video, promise placed here in 2015. Honda unveiled something that looked like it came from another decade, sleek, futuristic, different. It was called the Clarity Fuel Cell, and it wasn't just a concept car. You could actually buy it. In Japan, it became the first hydrogen-powered car available to regular customers. Not fleet vehicles, not prototypes, a car you could drive home. The Clarity wasn't a modified version of something else. It was built from the ground up with hydrogen in mind. Inside, it had a fuel cell system that converted hydrogen into electricity, powering the car smoothly and quietly. No combustion, no emissions, just hydrogen and oxygen combining to create power, with water vapor as the only byproduct. The range was impressive. Around 360 miles on a single tank, better than most EVs at the time. And refueling took about 5 minutes, just like a gas car. On paper, it was perfect. In practice, it faced a problem that had nothing to do with the car itself. There was nowhere to refuel it. Hydrogen stations barely existed. Unless you lived in certain parts of California or Japan, finding fuel was nearly impossible. And even in those areas, stations were few and far between. Long trips became a gamble. Daily driving meant constant awareness of where the nearest station was. For most people, that was a deal breaker. They didn't want a car that created problems. They wanted a car that solved them. And then there was perception. Hydrogen sounded complicated, dangerous even. People heard the word and thought of explosions, even though the technology was safe. Meanwhile, EVs were gaining traction. Celebrities drove them. Governments subsidized them. Charging stations started appearing in shopping centers and office parks. The messaging was clear, coordinated, and constant. Hydrogen didn't get that kind of support. No big ad campaigns, no rebates, no push from policymakers. So despite its engineering brilliance, the Clarity struggled. Sales were low. Interest was minimal. And in 2021, Honda quietly discontinued it. Most companies would have taken that as a sign to give up. But Honda didn't, because they learned something important. The technology worked. The car was reliable. The problem wasn't the vehicle. It was timing. The infrastructure wasn't ready. The public wasn't convinced. And Honda couldn't build that ecosystem alone, so they stepped back, let the EV wave continue, watched the market evolve, and kept working on hydrogen behind the scenes. improving the fuel cells, making them smaller, more efficient, more cost-effective, waiting for the conditions to change, and now they're changing. Hydrogen stations are being built, not in huge numbers yet, but steadily. California is expanding its network. Japan has made hydrogen a national priority. Germany is investing in hydrogen infrastructure for trucks and buses.